also sexual orientation would be considered invalid if it went that far. That is a problem.
So the Equalities Act doesn't tell you what you must do, it just tells you what you can do. So the Equality Act says you can completely legally exclude all men from a domestic violence shelter or a service if it's a legitimate means of achieving a proportionate aim. So excluding men so that they can talk about sexual assault without men being is legitimate. It doesn't tell you that you must include men, and it doesn't tell you that that you've got a legal entitlement to have single sex spaces.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the thing with like the toilets in schools, like that's not really covered under the Equality Act. But if you look at the guidance notes,
Yeah, agreed.
it does say that it's right to have somewhere that's single sex if you would expect it to be, if you would normally expect a place to be single sex. So the problem we had in the UK is, I think actually if you go to the guidance notes in the law, it's really clear. But because organisations outsource their equalities, frequently getting these organisations in like Stonewall, and Stonewall are misrepresenting, and people are very frightened around the law, especially if you're a stretched charity, for example. You don't want to risk a legal case. So if you've got Rape Crisis telling you the law incorrectly, or Stonewall telling you the law incorrectly, you're kind of a bit scuppered, even though if you go to the source of the legislation, it is actually quite clear. Then you mentioned like the Yogyakarta principles, and I just wondered if you'd followed that.
I don't think it's an international convention, is it?
No, it's not binding in any way. It's just
so
a load of people went and announced something.
Yeah, so this is the other thing. So, I mean, I don't see how in our constitution a head of power has like the actual power constitutionally to incorporate a law, an international law that actually isn't international law. It isn't a convention, and it isn't a treaty under international law. So
yeah.
So it should be invalid, because I could not understand how they could incorporate something that's not treaty or convention under that head of power, right?
Yeah.
Also, the other thing is that is in our basically our Sexual Discrimination Act, which we ratified from under CEDAW in 84, I think it was. So we've done the Yogyakarta in 2013, but included in that is sexual orientation. Okay, so if we're going to throw out those things, now this is just me thinking crazy shit. If we throw out the 2013 incorporation of sexual orientation because it's not legitimate law, does that mean that affects other things like changes we've had around our welfare system in relation to sexual orientation, or other rights related to same-sex law? And do you get what I'm saying? Like all of the other possible for
just the very
you can be
trans
inclusive. Doesn't mean you're inclusive of males, though.
No, but that's how they mean it. So they're intentionally embedding misrepresentative and vague language, because nobody's going to object to being, they can say, of course our service should be trans inclusive. And that's the problem that I think a lot that the EHRC is really struggling with, and the Labour Party and many people are struggling with, is fine, we've got this in law, but as long as you're allowing people to change their paperwork, how do these organisations uphold that? So Edinburgh Rape Crisis or Edinburgh Women's Aid could use single sex exceptions, or have a diverse service where they have maybe some mixed sex groups, some single sex groups, some single sex refuge, and then maybe standalone separate unit refuge where they could include men, for example.
Okay.
Right, but they were doing that just quietly, which is not really any good for women who are wanting to access and want to feel safe about accessing.
What about rural Britain, although everyone in Britain's talking about it. So it's completely different because no one in Tassie's talking about this. No one. And we just get on with it. In Launceston, where I'm from, it's just, it wouldn't even cross anyone's radar if they needed a DV service to quickly check the website to see if they allow men. It happened. Yeah.
I have a question before Ellie answers, because I don't, and in practice, how do trans identified males get into a service? Because, I mean, it's hard enough, this sounds dumb, it's hard enough for a woman to get into a service like when they've just been beaten up. Who is the perpetrator of these males, and why are they other males? Because I don't know how they can prove their case to get access in the first place. And that's just from my experience of how our refuge for domestic violence victims works here in the first place. So you can't just be like, oh, I'm in a, you can't just use it as a place to like get a break or get somewhere to sleep. We're pretty strong on the purpose and the intent of the legislation, not the literal interpretation. The way that they triage them could be a problem as well, I'm assuming, because why aren't they put up in men's shelters or homeless shelters? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is a lack of any places for anybody, whatever their need is. But then what they're doing through the triage is they're accepting uncritically everybody who says that they're women are women, and then also accepting the I don't know how to say it, those that are clearly male but are expressing that they're female. They would all be treated equally. There would be no there'd be no discrimination in that sense, which is a shame, because that's where you would normally have the discrimination.
Okay,
what I'm getting is the British law is similar to the US. I mean, British law is similar because we have a fairly similar system than US. US, it just seems completely batshit crazy. Hey?
It sounds similar. From what Ellie's saying, the act there sounds similar to what I've been reading.
But it's just Stonewall has just freaking scared the shit out of people.
I think exactly.
Yeah. Whereas for us, I just think TERFs here are making it harder as well, because they're saying things like men can go into these places, and I'm like, well, they have exemptions unless and you would assume if it's CEDAW, it's for biology, and they've applied for exemptions. So why are we fear mongering this? Why are we doing this?
The idea that like if we don't if that CEDAW didn't recognize sexual orientation, does that matter? Because actually women like lesbians could always like be recognized under the SDA because they'd be discriminated against because of their sex anyway. So that's fine. We're okay with that. Or is this going to be a problem? There's a million things that I'm trying to understand right now. And this is about jurisprudence, I guess. So the purpose of the legislation is literally like about women.
We're putting people in a situation where they start talking about passing privilege and all of these other things. So if, for example, someone was running a refuge or rape crisis service, and somebody had gone through triage and nobody had picked up yet that this so-called female person is in fact male, and then they turn up at the door for the session and they're, say, white, well-spoken, petite, trans woman, compared to if you had a big, hulking, working class black guy who's identifying as a woman. Like, I just think that that's going to bring out and make people really vulnerable to being wrongly discriminated against on other protected characteristics.
Even if it's sorted in the courts, for example, how do you do that in practice? When you're saying who should go, if their legal identity set, guess what? There's actually some women who don't look like women. Like they're
totally.
Do you get what I mean?
Yes,
Like there actually is. What are you gonna do? And there is probably trans-identified females who might look like males, but there might be just females who aren't anything, and they might be very masculine and male-looking. Like this is why we have a legal identity, isn't it?
You're talking more in nuances compared to like when I just look at Turf Island tweets.
This is the problem with the kind of the GCs on the right. They're confusing wanting to get rid of gender identity theory from schools or gender identity theory from policies and workplaces with the whole EDI agenda, which obviously is everything from anti-racism to sex equality, anti-homophobia, all of that stuff. So whenever, we see somebody attacking gender identity in whatever context, and we've got to be really careful because Free Speech Union, the Tories, the Tory party, for example, they want the whole Equality Act to be binned, and they want the whole equality, diversity and inclusion industry to be binned. They're anti all of it. So it's so important that we get people involved in correcting the equality and diversity training. So dangerous for everybody involved. And so you can see why some providers would quite happily go with the Stonewall advice, even if they're screwing over their own service users, because it makes it simple for them again. Who knows? What we really need is just some really strong feminist organisations advocating for women, in my view. But and I think that's something that has always been a bit of a problem with LGB, is that the men have always floated to the top of the organisations and women have always floated down to the bottom.
Yeah, that's absolutely the point. Probably that's happening with ACON. It's the men that are floating to the top, or if it's not the men, it's women that are propagating the men's ideology, and that's damaging. Like this is the same like baby out with the bathwater kind of stuff. Of course, right now, their leadership is shit, and we could possibly say our version of Stonewall, which is called ACON, has the same kind of bullshit happening. Okay, you can't throw the whole thing out because, well, I know you want to they should rebrand it because it's your brand. The Stonewall brand is just so bad now. But the point is, of course, they need to work on discrimination and is it possible, like this is just me in little fantasy land, I've never talked to ACON. I mean, I don't even, can you have a relationship with Stonewall to work on all that nuance?
That would be so incredible because there's so much correction that needs doing now about policies around lesbians, workplace, school, RSE, all of that stuff. So I think they should. I think they but I'm not involved with them, so I don't know. But I think they're open to ideas. You could email them, definitely, and tell them they should do.
Yeah, because these organizations have competing agendas and you do have to have some sort of dialogue with them. And then, like, for instance, like you said, like Stonewall has been saying bullshit to DV services and bullshit to councils that have restricted funding for DV services. So I'm hoping now that you've got these organizations starting, like you said, it's more the lesbian organizations and the feminist. I know they have very different politics within those organizations. So, but yeah, those lesbian organizations, I do hope they have just a strong statement of what their goals are. So, like you said, that they can advocate and work adjacent to Stonewall rather than be part of Stonewall. And I don't think we have anything like that yet.
I think they're open to ideas. You could email them, definitely, and tell them they should do.
Yeah, look, I should. If it's, like Spaces is my thing. I feel like I should just talk about it and hope they do it. But yeah, look, if I see one of them tweeting something, I should probably follow their Twitter account. What's it called?
I think it's just the Lesbian Project.
Okay, I better just simply follow that. Okay.